move on with our next session is Tom Iland. Diagnosed with autism at age 13, Tom Iland has worked hard to achieve his goals, learning to drive, living on his own, graduating from college, obtaining full-time employment, running 2 marathons, and having a girlfriend. Tom recently left his career as a certified public accountant to educate, inspire, and motivate people affected by autism and other learning differences. One of only 4,000 distinguished Toastmasters in the world and a member of the National Speakers Association, his mantra is know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, has been featured in keynote speeches and autism conferences around the country. It's among the topics in his award-winning best-selling book, Come to Life, Your Guide to Self-Discovery, and will be featured in a TEDx talk tomorrow. Tom recently had the honor of speaking at the United Nations as an emerging leader in the autism community that helps people become their best selves through coaching and consulting. He plans to become the first ever Toastmasters accredited speaker with autism and a certified human potential coach in 2019. Tom currently lives in Santa Clarita, California, with his dog, Bridget. So welcome, Tom Iland.
Thank you very much, Russ. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here today, and I know we're running a bit behind schedule, so I'm going to keep this short and sweet, and time permitting, I'll answer some questions, and I'll also have a book signing at the lunch period. So why I'm here today? I have autism. Can everyone hear me if I go out like this?
Yes.
Good. And you should have received...
Excuse me, could you take the microphone with you, please?
Yes. How's this?
Very good.
So you should have received a copy of my book in your goodie bag, and I feel a little bit like Ellen DeGeneres and Oprah Winfrey getting this out. You get a book, and you get a book. You get a book. But raise your hand if you heard John Elder Robison speak yesterday. Just about everybody. Okay, so you may have heard him talk about that he initially, or maybe the organizers of this event, wanted to bring him in to talk about transition. Because transition is a huge topic in the autism community today. And my book, Come to Life, is considered a prequel to transition. Because as I'll talk about in a couple of minutes, people with autism are growing up, not knowing who they are, what they want, and where they're going to go in life. And I've recently made the decision that's what I'm going to talk about, telling my story, sharing my struggles as well as my secrets to success in order to help people know themselves, love themselves, and be themselves. That's what my mother asked me when we sat down to write a book together. She asked me, Tom, what are your secrets to success? And I said, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. And up to that point, I've been doing a lot of what we call video talk, saying things in movies and TV, or things I had heard in movies and TV and conversation. She's like, where'd you hear that? I said, it came from up here and here. So she started to put me here. All right, tell me more. And the book started to write itself. And it has since been translated in Spanish. I understand a few of you have Spanish copies. And the International Latino Book Awards Commission recognized the book, and one of the judges said that this book needs to be in every high school and college around. Because as you'll see over the course of this presentation, and as you read the book, what's in those pages applies to anyone. Whether you're about to go to college, move out of mom and dad's house, find a job, or maybe you're already going through or have gone through some of these transitions, it's never too late to reinvent yourself and find something that makes you happy in life. Because I was a CPA, basically from a young age. I wanted to be George Lucas's accountant because I love Star Wars. And I set that into motion. Went to college, got my bachelor's degree in accounting, became a CPA, and even interned at Disney doing property taxes right out of college. And after I left the company, Disney acquired Lucasfilm. So when you think about it, retroactively and indirectly, I was George Lucas's accountant. So I stayed in that profession, accounting and finance, for 7 years before I realized just how unhappy it made me. And I heard more and more stories of my peers crashing and burning in adulthood because they were not understanding themselves or what they wanted in life. So I now work with my mother, who's been my greatest advocate and ally up to this point, and I'm starting to become my own best advocate and ally in many ways. But we realized that by having both a professional in the field and a parent, as well as someone with autism, telling their stories and sharing what works and what didn't, that's going to lead to better outcomes for everyone. And we now travel the country giving speeches like this as well as trainings, because when I first got diagnosed at 13, after my mother accepted my diagnosis, and mind you, the biggest prerequisite for me to accept my diagnosis is that my mother did. A lot of parents still live in denial about their child's diagnosis, and that can weigh the child down. But once she did accept it, she hit the ground running. Became the Autism Society of Los Angeles president, and LAPD knocked on her door one day saying, "We need more training on autism. Can you help us?" She said yes. So she starts training, and her program has now become the only evidence-based police training on autism in America.
Wow.
She's here in the audience today. Now raise your hand if you saw the Be Safe, the movie booth outside, where I've been sitting and my mother's been sitting. So we started training officers. We've trained thousands individually and collectively. But one day an officer said to us, "I could know someone has autism, but if they run from me, I still have to chase them. And if they fight with me, I have to fight back and win. It's my protocol. Who is teaching the young people to not run and not fight?" And the answer was nobody. So my mother took it upon herself to work with Joey Travolta, John Travolta's brother, up in Bakersfield, California, and made an entire movie to teach young people how to interact with the police. Because, ladies and gentlemen, training the police is not enough anymore. The young people have to know what to do when they meet the police. Stay where you are. Remain calm. Do what the police tell you to do. Disclose your diagnosis. The police tell us the more information they have, the better they can do their jobs. So, again, not just for autism, but this could apply to anybody. The police tell us, we wish everybody knew what's in this movie. And in the days of active shooter and other terrorist situations in our schools and our churches, sanctuaries, this information needs to be known now more than ever. I have some objectives I'm going to go over with you today as librarians. And raise your hand if you're a parent of someone with autism in the room. Got a couple of you, okay? Teacher, therapist, behavioral analyst, coach. Anyone I may have forgotten? Of course, librarians.
And then the actual autistic people in the room.
And people with autism in the room too. Sure included. But there. So I'm ultimately going to be going over today the benefits of person-centered planning, because I mentioned how people with autism are crashing and burning. A lot of times they feel like they're living a life that's not theirs, and that's causing some of the outcomes to go south. So we'll go over reversing that. Exploring the process of self-discovery and its impact on post-secondary outcomes, because that process of knowing yourself, loving yourself, taking a look inside, figuring out who you really are, what you really want, and where you want to go, that's going to make for a better life for you. And finally, we'll find out how to empower students with autism, and I mentioned IDD, intellectual developmental disabilities, but again, this could apply to anybody as they start to find out what makes them productive and how they can live a life of purpose. And as I started to write my book, and through my experience, I've discovered that there are a lot of religious leaders, philosophers, and even Monty Python have their meaning of life. This is my meaning of life. I'm really good with acronyms, forming mnemonics or memory aids from words. I found that life can be divided into these 4 categories and can be used as a guide to find out where our young people are, where they're going, and if they're succeeding or not. I could always do a little bit better. So love and relationships, independent living, further education, and employment are the 4 categories of life that can make someone live a life of productivity and purpose. And these slides, by the way, are in your handouts on the left side back of your folder if you want to follow along. But we found when my mother and I were writing the book and looking at outcomes of people with autism as they grew up, became adults, started living on their own, etc., we found that outcomes for people with autism and with respect to those 4 life categories, they were not good. Much below a lot of other categories of disability, learning difference, whatever you might call it. The one thing, and I'm going to be expanding on this in the presentation, that they found that was a huge success factor and really made a difference for the lives of people with autism was the I in life, which is independent living. Regardless of your intellectual capacity, regardless of your verbal ability, if you become more empowered to live a life of independence, if your parents delegate household chores to you, if you discover you can do something and people let you do things in life, get out of your comfort zone, even if it's awkward at first, that's what's going to lead to a better life for you. Now, for the parents in the room, or if you know a parent, raise your hand if you have a child or a young adult, and you do something for this child or young adult that they probably could be doing themselves. Raise your hand if you know someone or things like that. And thank you for your candor and your courage. But that is a really disempowering feeling for someone with autism when they are pretty much told they can't do something, or we give up on them, we write them off as a lost cause and figure, oh, I'll just do it for them anyway. This can really rob them of a future or the opportunity to learn what they are and are not capable of. Instead of us telling them they're no good at something or they can't do it, sometimes they must learn it for themselves. Because I'm an experiential learner. Any of you learn from experience, or you have something happen to you and then you decide I want more of this or less of that? People with autism need that the most. And I'm going to expand on that as we go through this. Is the lighting all right?
We're going to dim it a little. We're going to try to do it anyway.
All right, here we go. Because as people with autism grow up, and some of them are faced with the idea of taking a high school diploma, this can be devastating to their future. How many of you know someone or have experienced firsthand what's called the services cliff? You're receiving services during school, and then you take that diploma, you become age majority, then all of a sudden, the services disappear. That is the reality for a lot of people with autism. As they grow up, take that diploma, or they look academically good on paper, they're getting good grades. But as most of you know, people with autism might be thinking 2/3, or have a functioning capacity 2/3 of their calendar age. So those 18-year-olds that are graduating college, they might be thinking more like a 12-year-old. Did you let a 12-year-old out into the wild by him or herself and say, you're done, goodbye? Did you do that? So why are we doing it to people with autism? They need that support, they need those services, they need their transition plan kept open in order for the services to continue and avoiding, if possible, that crashing and burning feeling. But this is the reality we're facing today. And I'm taking the liberty of dividing those outcomes, those poor outcomes we talked about, into those 4 categories of life. We talk about love and relationships, the L in life. For people with autism, social skills, having interactions with people, parties, get-togethers, etc., it's not something they really excel in, and as a result, they lack the social experience. And in some cases, don't even get phone calls or make phone calls in more than a year. Can you imagine not making or taking a call or a text message in today's day and age in over a year? That is the reality for some people with autism more often than you might know. We look at independent living. Too many of them are living at home. I've heard one woman say, and there are lots of parents out there that are constantly concerned about where their child's going to go, what's going to happen to them after they die. I once heard a woman say, I wish my child would die one day before I did. That is the sad but unfortunate reality that a lot of young people and their families and parents and such are facing. Further education, going to college, university, trade school, or other further higher learning. There's getting into that school, and then there's staying in that school. Because I know a young man out in California who went from high school to a big 4-year university. It was a huge step for him, and he found he couldn't keep up, so he dropped out after just 1 semester. I personally found that a good middle ground, like a community college after high school, but before a big four-year university, makes for a better transition. And that's what helped me get my credits and skills I needed to become a CPA. But when we let our young people out into the wild say, you have to go to college, but then they find out college isn't what they expected, or they are told they have to take a major, and then they aren't really clear about what that means, or even the differences between high school and college. Like, remember in high school you listen for the bell for class to start, whereas in college you look at your watch or your cell phone clock to find out when you go to class, or books. I'll let you know a little secret that my mother and I discovered. We were going to college at the same time, me for her bachelor's, her for her master's. In high school, you get your books from like the library at the beginning of the semester, and then you give it back to the library at the end of the semester. In college, you have to buy them from the bookstore and sell them back if you choose to. Anytime you have the opportunity in college, buy the used books with the main concepts already highlighted. Most of the work already done for you. Hopefully not the whole page is highlighted. But for someone with autism, that's going to help them discover what really matters most and what they need to be learning for that particular class. So there's a little golden nugget for you. But ultimately, love and relationships, independent living, further education, they all lead up to the biggest downfall, the biggest deficiency, if you will, for people with autism, and that is employment. Finding what my parents and I call permanent, gainful employment. Because you can have volunteer positions, you can have internships, you can have part-time jobs. I've had those things, but it wasn't until I got permanent, full-time, gainful employment, I made money and could save some for a rainy day, did I realize I was being productive and living a life of purpose. People with autism all too often are being put in jobs that aren't suitable for them or are not making enough or working enough to make ends meet. And that just makes a bad situation worse. And on top of those 4 life categories, there are other complex health needs on top of that. You might have someone with autism who also has bipolar, someone who has autism and Down syndrome, or autism and ADHD. So they have to manage both diagnoses at the same time, all the while still managing what can be a good life for themselves. And I've heard anxiety and depression discussed over the course of this conference, and as I'm finding and exploring the idea of life outcomes, one of the questions I often get is, how can I motivate my young person to do X, Y, and Z, or how can I make them become less and less depressed? Well, my philosophy is, and we're going to expand on this in this presentation, the prerequisite to motivation, ladies and gentlemen, is clarity. Being clear about who you are, what you want, where you want to go in life will establish that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or that light at the end of the tunnel, or that trophy at the end, whatever you might picture. But sometimes the most basic questions are the most difficult to answer. That doesn't mean we shouldn't ask them or stop when they say, I don't know, start guessing and assuming, because that's what's going to lead to these outcomes. When you are living a life that is not yours, that is inauthentic to who you are and what you want, and you don't think of a way or know of a way to get out of it, the bad situation is just going to turn worse. So this is probably my biggest secret for you today. If you're involved in education, if you're involved in transition, if you are responsible or for overseeing someone's transition to adulthood, this is one of the things that I think can really improve the outcomes for your young person or young people. Because this is what happened to me out in California, and I'm not exactly familiar with how things are done here in Illinois, but the idea is that instead of letting your young person take that diploma and have services disappear, have the diploma held back. And yes, it might seem scary, or like, how dare you deny him the opportunity to walk with his classmates? Believe me, it's going to have a better outcome in the long run. And I'll explain how it worked with my family. So I knew I wanted to be a CPA. Part of being a CPA was passing the upper division writing proficiency exam in college. And that involved some reading proficiency and passing basic English, English 101. So I took the test for where I was aptitude-wise in English in 9th grade, tested in the most remedial English. So it was on the school district to bring that score up. Come 12th grade, test me again, no progress. Ultimately, the district had failed me. And my mother called them out on it and had the facts, the numbers, the figures to back it up. We didn't even need a lawyer, no litigation. So the district said, you're right, we didn't deliver. So what they did was, they made sure I knew what was happening here and why it was happening. Because if you can explain to your young person why things are happening, it's going to make more sense, or hopefully they'll be more on board. They explained to me that I will still get to walk with my fellow graduates, but inside my diploma envelope will be a note to see the special education director. What they did was they took my diploma and put it in the special education director's desk drawer until the district delivered on their promise to bring up those scores in English. And because of that, I got a transition specialist. I got speech and language therapy. I had someone to help me with independent living. I had support services while attending community college that I otherwise would not have had I taken that diploma. So if you have people in high school that are on the verge of getting their diploma, consider, I beg you to consider at the very least, that a diploma is an exit document and will deny a better future rather than open doors. I have the saying, a diploma in the case of people with autism will close more doors than it opens. Does that make sense? Now there are those that already have graduated, but that doesn't mean it's too late for you, and I have some things I'll be discussing about that. Ultimately, how do we improve life outcomes, those 4 categories, and making those outcomes in the report better? The key, ladies and gentlemen, that's currently being overlooked in our school systems, and is really addressed in depth in your Come to Life book, is the process of self-discovery. I'm going to be talking about this in my TED Talk tomorrow, that we need less focus on academics and more focus on actualization. Self-actualization specifically. Anybody here know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with the basic needs at the bottom and more self-focused or potential needs at the top? Self-actualization is the desire to become one's best self. And like you heard John Elder Robeson mention yesterday, he didn't pass math or basic English, but he is still one of the most successful men that I've ever come across. Academics are not the answer. It's actualization. How do we get there? Or why is actualization important? Because in the case of autism, people that have it, beginning with knowing about your strengths and your challenges, and understanding that focusing on just one and not the other can lead to poor outcomes. This is why I've made the conscious choice to not describe myself or anyone else as high functioning or low functioning. Because when you call someone low functioning, whether you say it to their face or they are calling it themselves, calling someone low functioning discounts or dismisses the person's strengths. Each and every one of us have something we do better than anyone else on the planet. For someone who may not speak as much or that you may deem low functioning, that could be wiping out their strengths and not ultimately seeing their value. On the other side of the coin, you call someone high functioning, or you call yourself high functioning. That dismisses or discounts at the very least your struggles. Because people with autism, as much as they might appear like they're living a good life, everything's okay behind the scenes, and as they get older in particular, their struggle becomes internalized. They hold on to a lot inside. They may not talk about it. They may not express themselves most fully or directly. So I encourage you to see if you can make the conscious choice to remove terms like low functioning, high functioning in your life. Because low functioning dismisses the strengths, high functioning dismisses the strengths. It matters that you address both sides of the coin, because if you focus on their strengths too much, you may not focus enough on what they call in Toastmasters, and Toastmasters help me improve my public speaking, and it might help you improve yours too if you're interested. They're called opportunities for improvement. There was a time I thought I had to know everything, or that I had to be perfect, but I realized that even Einstein asked questions, and he was believed to have answers. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew how to get the information that he needed to find. And our young people need the opportunity to see, yes, they do things well, but they also have things they can work on. And that's okay to have things to work on. Nobody is perfect. The alternative would be they keep making the same mistakes over and over again, and that strength, no matter how good they're at it, they don't address those opportunities for improvement, it's not going to get them anywhere. Feeling good about who they are and accepting their diagnosis. As I mentioned earlier, I couldn't accept my diagnosis until I knew my mother had. A lot of young people, when they first hear about that diagnosis, or maybe they grow up thinking, no, I don't have autism, I don't believe it. And they internalize the shame, the stigma, the pain, the rejection to themselves, and then that starts to be reflected with others. And really speaking up for themselves too. As I mentioned, the idea of living a life that is true and authentic to you, but no one's going to make you live the life you want except you. Each and every one of you in this room has the power to live the life that you want, but you must be the one that creates it. No one else can do it for you. And too many people with autism, and even when you think about it, some millennials, Generation Z, they're just waiting for life to come to them, just taking a back seat, hoping things will happen. But guess what? Life doesn't come to you. It's up to you to come to life. That's why I named the book, Come to Life. Each and every one of you must make what you want in your life a reality. And it is very much within your grasp and capability. So now I'm going to go over the next steps. My mantra, and this is me at the United Nations last month. My secrets to success, what I want to tell the world really, again, whether you have autism or not, is know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. In that order, mind you, because I mentioned that there was a young man who wanted to have a girlfriend. And I'll tell you a little bit about my girlfriend stories in a second here. But he wanted to have a girlfriend, but because of his own emotional situation and his diagnosis, which he had been diagnosed but not told about, a woman asked me, how can I get him to love himself? Well, I asked her, does he know about his diagnosis? Does he understand how it affects him? And the answer is no. Because until you know about your diagnosis, will everything else start to fall into place? It's a sequence. Starting with knowing yourself. As Aristotle once said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. That includes knowing about your diagnosis. Now I'll get into the story of how I found out about mine. I have two younger siblings, a brother and a sister. They both would get calls from their friends looking to hang out after school or on the weekends. One day I asked my mother, why doesn't the phone ever ring for me? My mother had to think fast on her toes. Rather than say, you don't have any friends, or you don't know how to make friends, she assured me that I was still learning how to make friends. And that helped me get off the floor, so to speak, helped me see that, okay, I'm still learning, I can still make friends. But it was the beginning of a much bigger discussion. And my parents proceeded to sit me down at the kitchen table and said, you know how sometimes you line up your blocks or your cars, how you rewind your favorite parts of videos all the time, recording Sesame Street, how you rearrange those magnetized letters in the refrigerator into words? These behaviors have a pattern, and that pattern has a name. Do you want to know what it's called? I said, no, I don't. And I retreated to my room. I must have cried in there for a good hour. The very thought that I was different, my brain was broken, there was no hope. I didn't want to face that. The turning point for me, up until that point, I had a big special interest, if you will, in Batman. And Batman, at the time, I liked how he had a cape and these fancy gadgets and such. But I also understood that Bruce Wayne is a man, a human being like I was. He had scary things in his life. He had his demons he had to face, but he would always find a way to get the job done. So that was the time when I started realizing I need to be the hero in my life. And I ventured out to Mom. Okay, Mom, what's it called? And she went on to explain what autism was to me. But mind you, I could not accept my diagnosis until I knew that she had. And I also had to understand that while there were difficulties ahead of us, a road, a very bumpy one at that, my parents assured me that they would not stop fighting for me no matter what. And that day my mother's mantra became, don't take no for an answer. If we speak Spanish, querer es poder. Where there's a will, there's a way. But they also assured me that no matter what, they would love me unconditionally. As RuPaul once said, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love someone else? Can I get an amen on that? Amen. You love your RuPaul. Too many people with autism are waiting to be loved, but first they must love themselves. And it really does start in the household. There are parents out there that wish their child didn't have autism. There are parents that resent their children for the lives that they have put them through. But my greatest gift from my parents was the idea, or at least the concept, the reality of unconditional love. They would love me no matter what. And I think that made all the difference. Because too many of us grow up or live lives of denial, shame, stigma, like something is wrong with us, and then that mental attitude is reflected on others and impacts our relationships in a negative way. And mind you, I realized that I was worthy and capable of love, but getting others to love me back was a bit of a chore, if you will. Let me tell you a little bit about my encounters with women. So I knew I wanted to have a girlfriend from a young age. So when I liked a girl, I picked up the phone and called her. Left her a voicemail and called me back. Didn't hear back from her. Called her again. Another call, left another voicemail. Still no answer. Called her again. By now you're starting to get freaked out, right? Well, so was she. She went to my sister and said, if your brother doesn't stop calling me, I'm going to the police. All the more reason why we have to be safe out there, right? And when you think about it, these underlying social rules that we usually pick up from experience, or we usually get the hint, if a girl isn't calling you back after 2 calls, go away. People with autism do not get those hints. And they don't pick up on the responses of others, how they can adjust accordingly. So my sister, after hearing from this girl, she's going to call the police on me, went to my mother, and we had to establish a little analogy. We call it the tennis game. So a relationship, a friendship, is like a tennis game. I serve you the ball, and you have to serve it back. Because I was serving, and calling, and not getting any answer back. So the rule we set is I get 2 serves, 2 calls, and if there's no call back, I have to find another girl to play with. And that's the rule that we set and I follow to this day. But people with autism are not being taught these underlying social rules. We unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, live in a see something, say something society. And instead of attempting to reason with this person, attempting to bridge that social gap, fill in the knowledge that our young people are lacking, we're just going to call the police on them. So I encourage you, if there is a social gap, something missing in the young person's life, something that they aren't quite getting or that hint they're not picking up on, direct, explicit instruction is what is needed most. Because what's implied, or I was talking with a gentleman this morning at my table, he was talking about common sense, and I'm thinking, common sense is just not so common anymore. And our young people need to know that information firsthand and be taught or told what is a better behavior before they wind up on the wrong side of the law. Now, another part of loving yourself, I mentioned the idea of living an authentic and true life to yourself. It's transitioning into the third part of the mantra, which is be yourself. got another quote for you. Coco Chanel, she once said, being yourself, or I should say beauty begins when you decide to be yourself. Beauty begins when you decide to be yourself. And this gets a little bit controversial when it comes to people with autism, because they want to live a life that's true and authentic to themselves, but at the same time, that could close them off from becoming their best selves, not learning or growing or being open to what others have to say. Another personal example. I was born here in Hinsdale, and when I was about 16 years old, my aunt, my mother's sister, who's the autism specialist for this state, introduced me to a girl down in Pekin who had autism, loved Star Wars like me, and that was the basis of our friendship. We were pen pals for about a good 10 years. So after about 10 years of knowing each other, we decided to become a couple. And she moved to Los Angeles from Pekin to be with me. And you can imagine that was probably a big culture shock for her growing up in a rural part of the state to a big suburb of a big city. Well, she had never received services her entire childhood, and both of her parents were on the autism spectrum. So my mother and I worked to help her get some services and get her some help she needed. A job coach, independent living specialist, someone to help her become a productive, purposeful adult. Well, she called her mother, told her about the services she was receiving, and the mother responded, "They're looking to change you. Don't let them." And so my, spoiler, now ex-girlfriend, resisted the help that we were giving her. She didn't understand that it was not to change her, it was to help her live the life that she wanted. And I was with her for 4 years before I decided I'm not loving myself, I'm not being my best self, and I had to let her go. And as she's getting ready to move back to Pekin to be with her parents, she said to my mother, "It's a shame you guys wanted to change me this whole time. I like myself the way I am." So what we need to do, ladies and gentlemen, going forward to fix or to better this disconnection is to always make it about the young person. Have it be about their future, their goals, their wants and needs, and that will more likely get them on board. And speaking from my own experience, I wanted to have a girlfriend. My mother put me into social skills classes. I'm like, I don't want to go to social skills classes. But she reminded me, you want to have a girlfriend, right? I'm like, yeah. Well, this will help you get a girlfriend. I'm like, all right. I bit the bullet. But our young people need to understand, and parents and teachers, therapists, librarians, all of you, you want your child, your young person to have a good future, right? If you can help them see that what you're doing helps them, but let them make the final decision. Because people with autism have the capacity to be open to other people's opinions, suggestions, considerations, and it can certainly help them. They can hear what they have to say and make the best informed decision for themselves, by themselves. Because I think this is what's preventing our young people from becoming their best selves. When they live a life that's not theirs, when they're living a life to please others, when they're doing something that they, in their gut, knows is not right or good for them, then they start to go downward, in a downward spiral. But if they have the final decision, if they are empowered with that decision-making ability, and they are living a life that is true and authentic to themselves, then the progress will be made. Because in my experience, I had all the information I needed, but I had the final say, and I was the one that made things happen. That made all the difference. So our young people need to understand it's about them. You're there to help them, and offer something to them, and they can take it or leave it. It's their decision. So what can we do to create opportunities for our young people to know themselves, love themselves, and be themselves? I mentioned the idea of experience because a lot of times, raise your hand actually if you ask someone a question like, what do you want to do? What are you good at? Where do you see yourself? And they've said, I don't know. How many of you have had that happen? Pretty much everyone. And that's very common for people with autism. Because I once told my mother, Mom, if it hasn't happened to me, my mind is a blank page. I cannot picture what if or what something would be like unless I'm physically experiencing it. So our young people need the opportunity to find out what's out there for them, explore their options. They need to get the opportunity to actually experience what it's like to be in that career, in that job that they really want, so that they can evolve and take their life to the next level. This is another concept we have in Come to Life. We call it E to the third power, the letter E with the exponent 3. That's explore, experience, and evolve. To help young people find their niche. Because I had a chance to get a lot of exposure to opportunities and figure out what I wanted, go towards more of what I wanted and away from less of what I wanted. But this can also clear up a lot of the stereotypes or some of the preconceived notions that our young people have. For instance, a lot of them want to be video game designers, right? Well, there's plenty of work involved in designing video games. You need to know the marketer, you need to do research, you need to write reports. And they discover it's not always playing games all day. Harsh reality, but a necessary one. I was talking with a young man out here at the table. He was telling me how he wanted to be a semi-truck driver because he saw it in Smokey and the Bandit. True story.
That's me.
I wasn't going to say your name, but
That's my boy.
the point is, sometimes we see things and they look good in movies or on television, but when you find out what's actually involved or entailed, it's a whole other ballgame. And I'll tell you a little bit about my work experiences. So I knew I wanted to be George Lucas's accountant from the time I was a senior in high school. And I figured he's probably going to want someone who has some experience in entertainment. So I started working at Hollywood Video. You remember those brick and mortar video rental stores? So I started working there, reshelving videos, and mind you, I'm still in high school while I start working. The earlier you can start work or giving them exposure to the real world or some real responsibility, the better. So I'm reshelving the videos, and this went on for about 3 months. My mother comes in one day and asks, "Are you going to teach him anything else besides reshelving videos?" And this is through a workability program through the school. And the manager responded, "Oh, we just figured workability students can just reshelve videos." So from the get-go, my potential, my capabilities were being underestimated. And that happens a lot, more often than not, ladies and gentlemen, in today's society, particularly when it comes to autism. So after Hollywood Video, I wanted to work for its competitor, Blockbuster. Got some more responsibilities there. I operated the cash register, I updated the store advertising, did inventory of items in the store. But it was also around the time that Blockbuster had gotten rid of late fees. You remember that? You'd be penalized if you returned a movie late. Well, it was a transition for them, and customers were not understanding the new policy that if you keep a movie so long, it would be sold to you as if you own it. And customers did not take kindly to that. And I was on the receiving end of a lot of customer anger and frustration. I remember one story of, I was in the store by myself, helping a customer. There was no manager, he'd gone out to lunch. And I said, or she asked me, "Who do you call if there's an emergency? It's just you, who do you call if there's an emergency?" I said, "The police." And she responded, "Now you're just being a smart ass." The manager eventually sided with me when he came back from lunch, but that's beside the point. What I'm getting at is I voiced my concerns to my manager, whom I'd known since elementary school, and he responded, "Tom, who are people going to believe? The CEO of a Fortune 500 company or a community college accounting student?" Well, guess what? Customers didn't have the movies they wanted. They stopped coming to Blockbuster. Blockbuster lost money, and now no more Blockbuster. So maybe that community college accounting major was onto something. I say this because our young people have something to offer employers, businesses, even this campus. But it's up to us to see that potential and the possibilities. So I moved on from movie rental stores, went to a movie theater, selling concessions, selling tickets in the box office. It was going pretty well, and I even got salesperson of the month. I always asked each customer, "Would you like to purchase the candy, popcorn, drink combo?" And they made me employee of the month. Asked. The difficulty with that job was my peers, who were a bit immature and liked to play pranks on one another. And anybody remember that TV show Punk'd with Ashton Kutcher?
Yeah.
Well, they played some jokes on me. Two of them even got into a fight, and they punked me, saying it was my fault that they were fighting. And a manager was in on the joke too. So I realized, okay, maybe this isn't the most mature environment to be working in, and I left that job. And that was the time I realized, okay, maybe retail, based on this experience, these experiences are not working for me. So I'm exploring my options, working multiple jobs, gaining experience, figuring out what's working and what's not, and then evolving, making better decisions based on those experiences. So after that, I started working in finance jobs, did an internship, even temp jobs as well. Finally, remember I was talking about permanent accounting, a permanent position, gainful employment? I finally got that. It was at an engineering firm in Pasadena. And my manager there had known my manager from Disney, was very accommodating. I usually didn't disclose my diagnosis in the interview, but within the first week of the job, I would say, I need a little help with, or if you can help, bear with me, I'm gonna ask a lot of questions, but it will eventually stick. My Disney manager was very accommodating, even promoted me within Disney. So I figured this gentleman at the engineering firm would be as accommodating and understanding. Well, I told him about my diagnosis within the first week, and he responded, "You tricked me. You lied during the interview. I don't have to help you, and I'm not going to," which is illegal. And HR was called in. I had a job coach who went to bat for me. But ultimately, this was the beginning of the end of my accounting career. And I resigned from that position after just 4 months. But his boss, saw the potential in me and offered me another position. It was for less pay, but I got more exposure to other departments, got to create value in other ways, and they utilized a lot of my talents for like reading reports and knowing where the numbers were. And so I stayed with that for 2 years. But again, this was the start of something bigger for me. A little voice inside me was telling me, I do not belong at a desk all day. I belong here, telling my story, sharing what works and what doesn't, so you can help young people find their voice too. Because each and every one of us has the potential to live the life we want, but only if we speak up for ourselves and allow young people to speak up for themselves too. Teach them what they need to know to live the life that they want. So I encourage all of you and the young people in your life to find your voice and use it. Solidify your message to the world and own it. And tell your story and live it. Because who doesn't want these outcomes for people with autism? Self-awareness, knowing yourself, self-acceptance, loving yourself, self-esteem, be yourself, self-advocacy, finding your niche, finding your voice, and self-determination, being the hero in your life, and realizing that life does not come to you, it's up to you to come to life. How are we doing on time? Will we be able to take a few questions? I will take some questions. In the back.
Did you ever have any difficulties with job interviews, and do you have any advice for people on the spectrum that
So the question was, did I ever have any difficulty with job interviews? And that is certainly something that people with autism struggle with a lot, particularly when it comes to whether or not to self-disclose. I'll tell you a couple of my secrets that helped me get a lot of the financial jobs that I got after college. One thing I do when I go into an interview is always have at least 5 good stories to tell the interviewer about how you helped an organization, what times you went above and beyond, times where you really shined, and realize that if you don't succeed, there's always experience, something you can take away from that interview so you can go forward. And I'll tell you another thing I think got me a job, or at least a second interview 9 times out of 10. We live in the day and age of emails and quick digital responses. When was the last time you actually wrote a thank you card to somebody? Every time I interview with someone, I send them a thank you card, a piece of paper with their address stamped to them so they can display it on their desk, and always have a way of referring to something we talked about in the interview. So like, thank you for such and such, and maybe you have a nice compliment like, oh, I hope the Cubs do, like if you talk about the Cubs in the interview, I hope the Cubs win the next game, or something like that, so they can remember who you were, what you talked about, and what that experience was like, so then we'll probably bring you back again and help with your job interview question. Anyone else? Yes?
You mentioned that you were in social skills groups. Can you tell us anything that you found especially helpful or anything that was especially not helpful?
No.
So social skills groups, what helped and what didn't. I would say some of them had, the young men I was with in the social skills group had similar objectives as I did. Like they wanted to have a girlfriend too, they wanted to have relationships, or maybe they wanted a job or wanted a particular class or major or something. I would say their experiences and also the input that they got from various sources. I'll give you an example. I had a little bit of a leg up on hygiene, for example. My sister flat out told me, Tom, girls like a guy who keeps himself clean. Girls like a guy who knows how to cook. Girls like a guy who knows how to dance. So I took it upon myself to clean myself up, learn how to cook and learn how to dance, and I got dates. Other people in the room with me, even if I made it clear to them that that's what women want, I have a really credible source, my sister. They may not always follow through with that, or clean themselves up, or learn what they need to learn to really have the relationships that they want. So I think the idea that I'm doing these good things, I know you can do them too, but you're not, that was a little bit frustrating or not so good part of social skills. But I've also understood over the years that everyone is learning at their own pace. People with autism are learning at their own pace. They may not always pick up on the hints or take the advice or the opinions, the suggestions, the considerations that we give them. But remembering that it's about what they want and reminding them that this is what you want, this is how we can hopefully make it happen. Have one in the back there.
Are we?
Yeah.
Absolutely love everything that you had to say, especially about the importance of self-esteem and self-acceptance. Because what good is it to, like, for example, what good would it be for me to have like a college diploma if I felt like proud about myself, if I felt like I couldn't do anything, and that would actually, from my experience, I've had things like that, it's kept me from actually acting on what I want in life and pursuing what I want.
And I think this is something that people with and without autism really need to know, is that what you do in college or what you did in high school or what you get your degree in is not always going to be what you're doing forever.
That's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I knew I would be doing this, I did this part-time while I was doing accounting jobs. Like I did a speech at like a high school or to police officers or to regional center administrators here and again. But the idea that it gave me a sense of making a difference, I felt good about myself after it, and knowing down the road I could get paid for doing what I love, degree or not. That's how I made a difference and became happier. I'm going to actually move on from, but I can take more after the book signing. You, sir.
Just very quickly, have you ever wondered, like, do I really want this, or is this something I think I should want?
Excellent question. Is this what I want, or is this something that I think I should want? Because instincts. Even to this day, I still second guess myself instead of going with my gut or tying back into love myself or loving yourself. You cannot live your life to please others. You have to do what's right for you. And that little voice, that conscience, something that you are telling yourself or you're constantly being told in your own head, to really follow that voice. And yes, certainly be open to what others have to say. Keep an open mind. Never stop learning. Sometimes we all have to learn from our own mistakes, sometimes even the hard way. But at the end of the day, if it's what you want, it's what matters most. I think it was Marilyn Monroe who said, live life with no regrets, because at some point, it was exactly what you wanted.
Such a great presentation. Thank you so much. For those of us in the room who supervise and manage employees, what questions should we ask our employees to better support individuals with autism? And what support can managers give employees to better support them in the workplace?
So employees supporting people with autism in the workplace. Accommodations can and do vary, and I'm not talking about stuff like a wheelchair ramp necessarily, but in my experience, I found if you were to give me my directions in writing, that would help a lot if you can provide that accommodation. I mentioned with my supervisor at Disney, I may ask the same question multiple times, but it will stick. So be patient, keep an open mind, I will deliver. And flexibility. And also the idea of having structure, because for people with autism, the world is an unstructured, chaotic place. So if you can provide structure, if you can have a schedule or some kind of routine that you can follow and deliver on and provide value for you and your organization, that's what's going to lead to a win-win.
So you're going to be doing book signing
I am.
at your table?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we would have a break.
I'll take one more question then for the book signing. I actually have to catch a 4 o'clock flight to my TED Talk. Last one.
What would you suggest for someone that is already has also an associate in accounting and also a bachelor's in other areas, but priority it's difficult for him to. He already has his schedule, and we've been trying to help him in different areas and also trying to get a better job than what he does right now. Really take, but it's difficult for him to change or to do more flexible, although they've been trying different things. What would you suggest?
So someone with an associate's in accounting that doesn't maybe have the best job for himself, but to help him see other items or other opportunities. I would say something along the lines of, I got into accounting because I thought it would make me a lot of money, and that a lot of money would make me happy. Turns out I had it reversed. You have to do what makes you happy first, and then the money will come. Because when we work ourselves to become mentally exhausted, emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted, we're not having a good quality of life. So if this young man has someone or something that he really wants to do, that really makes him happy, even if he's got that accounting degree, even if he's in a situation he doesn't really want to be in, he has the power, he can be the hero in his life, find his niche, find his voice, and live the life that he wants. And it is never too late to change course, put your life on a path that is more for you and will make a bigger and better difference in this world. And with that, I'm going to conclude. Thank you all so much for your time.
Okay, as we mentioned, Tom is signing books at his table. I think what you can see easily is the Be Safe sign on the table by the windows. And we'll be taking lunch. That's not going to run late, so we'll start again at 1:15.